The last speaker before we go on to our discussion is R.B.TOTH. Mike is the president of R.B.TOTH Associates and an honorary research associate at the University College of London. He has over 25 years of experience providing program management, technical integration, and strategic planning support for numerous academic, preservation, and scientific cultural heritage projects around the globe, and literally around the globe. He has led advanced digitization and archiving projects working closely with data managers, information technology professionals, imaging scientists, technical experts, scholars, and museum and library managers and staff, providing the planning, integration, and management needed for efficient research and development, preservation and access, also helping museums, libraries, and other cultural heritage institutions make more data widely available for all. I don't want to read off all the different projects that Mike has been involved in, just a couple. He has done research for the Vatican Library. Some of you might be familiar with the work he has done on the palimpsests and manuscripts at St. Catherine's Monastery and the Sinai. And he has also worked on Islamic and Western manuscripts at the Walters Art Museum. Please welcome R.B.TOTH.
All right, we're talking about observing, and a key factor in observing, of course, is the capture, but we've always looked at the observation of manuscripts or whatever they may be as a full system, looking at who we're supporting most of all. And critical are, of course, those who are studying the manuscripts, the scholars, the conservators that we've cited, and this has changed over the years. If you look in prior centuries, you always had to bring the manuscript to the scholar to the manuscript, or the map, or whatever it may be. They would work with it individually, with direct observation, or perhaps collaboratively around a table, passing it around. Well, that's changed now, where we have not only the ability to digitize and to make the object, a digital surrogate of the object available globally, but also tools to collaborate. And to collaborate not just on a screen somewhere, but even on a mobile device, and to share and to interact with that object in new ways. We've heard a number of different ways, whether it's in different spectral bands or in different dimensions virtually. And over the years, we've developed methods of looking at the unseen with, in particular, spectral imaging. We started with the Archimedes Palimpsest, a privately held work, which is now freely available at archimedespalimpsest.net. And in that period, we've advanced spectral imaging from handheld lights to now a more integrated system. As Francisca cited, we've worked with St. Catherine's Monastery. We are still working, despite what we had, 2 changes in government, killings along the road to and from St. Catherine's. But our work continues there with His Eminence the Archbishop and the monks at St. Catherine's Monastery, with all the data to be made available, that we've captured to be made available next year on the web. Working with David Livingstone's Diaries from Scotland, their favorite son there. Here he had written on top of newspaper in berry ink and whatnot. So with these, we've developed a use, and this is now used by a number of different organizations, of LED narrowband lights. This started with Dr. Bill Christiansberry working with a cigar box and some lights and some light tubes that looked so pretty that Hollywood decided they were going to use them in National Treasure. Let the record note that we came up with it first. But then he's advanced it since then. And this was a prototype panel that he had developed for the Archimedes Palimpsest for our final re-imaging of the entire palimpsest, using a series of LED lights from the ultraviolet through the different colors of visible light and into the infrared, and has since advanced these further. So they're integrated into a single panel. This was a earlier generation where we had the infrared in the middle, UV lights here, the visible lights around the edge. Now we have a primary panel with the UV and visible, and then an IR subpanel above that. We've advanced this over the years, mainly based on feedback from the scholars, from the conservators, from the users. It is not for us to interpret the data or say whether it's good data or not. We find we have to work in close collaboration with the scholars, with the conservators, to define what provides optimal results for them. So we've now integrated this into a modular system where we have the two light panels we're now using a phase 1 60 megapixel camera. And we have a filter wheel here to capture fluorescence. We found that the UV and the blue light will create fluorescence in some inks, some pigments, in some parchments. And with that, we gain additional information about text which may be palimpsested. It may be scraped off or overwritten with other text, or is faded due to environmental damage. It could be water, could be just poor RH, poor handling, previous conservation treatments even. So what the system does, as opposed to using a filtered system where you have a broadband light, you have a light cutting across various spectral bands all down onto the object, and then you filter it before it reaches your sensor. Instead, we're putting only narrow wavelengths of light upon the object individually. First the UV, the blue, the various colors into the infrared with only a lens. I'm going to say without a filter. Now we do add a filter for the fluorescence, but without a filter. So what you end up with is only the doses of light you really need to capture the image. So you're limiting your ultraviolet, for example, and you're limiting the overall light exposure. And we developed this in concert with conservators, including Abigail Quant at the Walters Art Museum, as well as the conservators at the Vatican, who, rightly so, are concerned about any potential damage to the object. So by using the narrowband, we felt that helped minimize the damage there. So what you end up with is a dark room with blinking lights. Everyone who wants to join us on these imaging sessions thinks it's so cool to come in and see someone imaging an object, until they've sat through the first 10 minutes of watching blinky lights go on as you're sitting there. Usually for some reason everyone goes quiet. And then after that it's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, that was good, we'll carry on. So you end up with this stack of monochrome images. As I said, we have no filters. And by no filters, I mean no filters. There's no bare array in front of the camera, and there's no IR filter, of course. So you end up with this image cube of monochrome images. You start with the ultraviolet, you go on around through the infrared, and then you have your fluorescence filtered image. A key part of this is operating all these different units. You got the lights, you got the filter wheel, and you got the camera. And so we've built on, working with phase 1, we've built on their software, their Capture One software, to be able to drive all of these together, so you're not having to, let's set you set the exposure all at the beginning, and the lights click, the camera clicks, the filter wheel moves around, and you end up with this stack of images without having to do a lot of manual work. A key part of it, though, we cited, in fact it's in the inside poster, is the capture, but also the processing. The ability to glean more information by the integration and not manipulation, but the way you combine these various images. In this case, we have the Coronaro Missal, $4.2 million worth of manuscript, where we're trying to see what's underneath this little medallion there. And we just did this last week, just for you guys. So you can see there's some undertext there, which was enhanced through PCA processing. This uses ImageJ, NIH, National Institutes of Health, medical processing tool. And then Bill Christiansberry has developed various plugins for it that are tailored to the metadata and the data that comes from this system. So coming back to Harvard here, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the last time we were in Harvard and what brought us to Harvard last time. We had imaged back in 2009, and when it was bound, we did some leaves, and then it was unbound. And we did the entire medical text of Galen, which was palimpsested under a songbook, under a 11th century songbook, I think it was. And this is early Syriac on simple drugs by Galen. And it gives good insight into the transmission of medical knowledge from the Greek to the Arabic through the Syriac there. And so we had imaged this, and I brought a scholar, Gregory Kessel, up to the owner's library, which is near me in Washington, D.C. And he's holding, pulled it down off the shelf and gave him this big hunk of a book because it's palimpsested, so it's combined from all these pages of a prior book, and it's rather thick. And he's looking through it. He says, I feel like I've held this before. Well, he was just up here at the Houghton Library. And thanks to Bill Stoneman and the folks there, he got to look through some of the Syriac texts. And he had this one leaf there, and he had a picture of it on the screen. And he said, this leaf, which was Houghton Syriac 172, came from this manuscript. And so we came on up to Harvard, and down in the sub-basement of the Widener Library there, we imaged 172, along with various other things, including a little piece of papyrus called The Gospel of Jesus' Wife, and some other interesting objects here. And so what we wound up with, this is a combination of a color image and a processed image. The overtext we've suppressed are in gray, and you can see the undertext running in columns here. And thanks to the library here, this data has been made available under Creative Commons license for sharing. And since then, Dr. Kessel was looking in various catalogs of Syriac texts. And he looked at Sebastian Brock's catalog of the Syriac text at St. Catherine's Monastery. And from 4 lines in that text, he said, this is palimpsested. And this was also part of the Syriac Galen palimpsest. He hadn't seen it. He was not in the Sinai at that point. So we were imaging at St. Catherine's Monastery. So we added this to the bunch, and we imaged Syriac New Finds 65, which is another leaf of the Syriac Galen palimpsest. And this is what that looks like if you look. And some of this is very difficult to read because the Syriac text has a chalky layer on it. They did a real good job of scrubbing it off. So the scholars are still working on trying to identify some of these. Turns out from catalogs, there's a couple leaves at the Vatican Library. So we imaged those. And here again, you can see the undertext. Unlike, and I must say, I used to work for the federal government, worked in an Orthodox monastery, worked in the Vatican. I've worked with 3 of the greatest bureaucracies in the world. I've worked at Harvard, too. Yeah. But we still have one issue with the Vatican. Fortunately, since you're all either educated public or scholars, I can share this with you, but we aren't able to put the Vatican collection, what we've got from the Galen palimpsests online yet. But we also found one more, Gregory found one more at the BNF 382. and we just imaged that in May. That evening, Bill Christiansberry, after a few beers, finally celebrating that we had gotten everything done in Paris in one day, he did some processing. The next day, the scholars were providing some feedback from that leaf. This is when we were imaging there using the Capture One software, and you can see here again, this is at the BNF. You've got the UV on through the various monochrome images there. So, and with that, we got good results. As I said, Bill got those posted very quickly. And we now have these all, with the exception of the Vatican, we have these all online. They're all freely available. The ones from the owner, you can put that on a coffee cup if you want. The ones from Harvard, St. Catherine's Monastery, and the BNF are all available under non-commercial use. But you can go to digitalgalen.net, and we still have hopes for the Vatican. And you can download, you can study them, you can use them within your own research there. So key, as with the Archimedes, as with Livingstone, has been making the data available, not only for broader research and collaboration and feedback on the imaging, but also for preservation. If people use it, if it's out there, if people notice, as we had with the Archimedes Palimpsest, that our data was corrupted and let us know, and then, okay, we've got to fix that, then you have better chance of digital preservation of those objects. Otherwise, and some, as we were citing earlier, some of the 3D, some of this is very large data. How do you deal with those? That's the challenge. So if you go in there, you'll find all the data is available for each of the leaves, including the captured data. So we're now at our 4th generation system with the phase 1 camera. We just last week, here again, just for you guys, we re-imaged a couple leaves of the Galen. It was still bound. Some of the matching leaves to the Houghton leaf, for example, and the St. Catherine's leaf. The scholars wanted to study those in context. So we set up in a back room of the owner's library there, dragged it off the shelf, threw it under the camera, and did some more imaging. Then did processing of it. This is some of the most recent processing. I think Bill just put it up last week, and we did this last Thursday, so he just put it up last weekend. So you can see some of these are rather challenging undertexts. And of course, we have not yet figured out, and that's where we're interested in terahertz, in getting through one layer of iron gall ink to another layer of iron gall ink. So get some pseudo-colors, or as we call it, a Sharpie, not because it's really sharp, but the black and white images was preferred by the late Bob Sharples, so we named the images after him. Technology's changed. I think if we look at the Archimedes Palimpsest, our work over 10 years there, we went from a 6-megapixel camera to a piezoelectric camera, and the advances in, as I showed you already, the illumination technology, and it's not stable. So you've got to deal with the changing technologies, and we've advanced since then. We're now at our 4th generation system, as I said, and the different types of technology that are available. We speak in terms of good digital imaging. There's filtered spectral imaging. There's what we call the narrowband imaging. And then you've got 3D, you've got CAT scans, you've got X-ray fluorescence, and you've got to look at the cost and the utility of those. You've got PTM, RTI, you've got various other capabilities, each of which fits a different solution, and you have to look at your price point versus the ultimate applications that you have from those systems. But in addition to the technology, and we tend to focus on technology, whether it's the hardware, the software, or the data, we've also always got to think about the people. I was saying that key to us has been feedback from the scholars, feedback from the conservators, and to ensure that people have the skills, whether it's to do the processing or to really make use of those images. If you have a very complex 3D image and they don't have the tools or the processing power, then you've got to think in terms of what the people have. You also have to think in terms of your processes, not the processing, but the processes. What are your standards for your metadata? What are your standards for formatting your output, whether they're images or whatever? And critical to any system really is how you integrate the technology with the people and the processes. As we've cited, we look at the technology, we've made great advances in the technology, but we have to think of that in the context of those who are going to use it and how it's going to be used. We're dealing with changing cultures. You no longer go to your southern window as Nigel Wilson does in the summer months in England and looks at the object. You now have the opportunity to collaborate and share. And one of the great things, there was an article in the New York Times on the 2nd of June about our work on the Syriac Galen, and actually it wasn't about our work, and that was a great thing about the article. It mentions the imaging, there was a paragraph on that, but it was about the scholars' work. And when the New York Times has ever published a full-page, multi-page article on the work of Syriac scholars, is amazing. But the culture's changing, and there's a lot of things that are out there to be discovered, and a lot of things of interest to the broader population too. And we have the opportunity to empower more and more people with the technology. You don't have to have access to the museum. You only need access to the internet and to the data. And providing that access for machines to process it, for the people, and ultimately a key factor of that access is the intellectual property and making those data available. So in closing, looking at the future, we've got a study coming up, we just got it underway, studying mummy mass cartonnage. Now, cartonnage are the papyrus layers that sometimes have fragments of old documents that were used to make mummy masks for more middle-class Egyptians. And what we want to do is study these to see if there is text under it, if we can see if there is even text extant under it, and then if we can read the text. And the goal is to try to minimize the tearing apart, the soaking these masks in palmolive detergent and tearing them apart to get the texts. It's very difficult. The laws of physics are against us. So we're trying, starting with spectral imaging, but working with a number of different techniques to try to integrate different imaging modalities. That includes the spectral, but also includes X-ray fluorescence, as we started with the Archimedes. Sure, we're using a synchrotron, but to see what that offers, micro CT, X-ray, optical coherence tomography in the infrared and in spectral. And we were just talking about possibly using terahertz for this. So if anyone has any ideas, anyone wants to participate, the goal is to make all the data freely available. The goal is to really just identify what offers potential. This is a QRC effort. We've got a year to try to see what we can do what we can throw at this to provide some future generations with ideas on technologies that will work, and we're open to ideas. So I thank you very much, and I guess we'll turn over to a panel soon. So thank you.